Before you listen, take a breath. What you're about to hear isn't entertainment, it's an encounter, a mirror that doesn't flatter, a voice from the depths of your own psyche whispering what you've always feared might be true, that the mask you wear has already begun to wear you. If you choose to continue, remember, awareness has a cost, and once you see the face beneath the persona, you can never unsee it. They say the eyes never lie. But I have seen eyes that do, eyes that smile while the soul behind them suffocates. In every face that moves through the crowd, there's a war between what is shown and what is hidden. You see it too, don't you? The polite laughter that sounds rehearsed, the small nods that mean nothing, the silence that screams. The world has become a masquerade, and the masks are no longer accessories. They are organs, breathing, pulsing, feeding on the truth they conceal. Jung called it the persona, the mask we create to survive society. It was meant to be a tool, a bridge between our inner chaos and the outer order. But over time, the bridge became a cage. The persona grew teeth, and one day, humanity forgot to take it off. The roles we play began to play us. The teacher who preaches peace while drowning in rage. The influencer who smiles for millions while collapsing in private. The parent who says, "I'm fine," as their soul decays quietly in the corners of the night. There was once a patient, a man of striking calmness, who came to Jung complaining of fatigue, not of the body, but of being. He said, "Doctor, I feel like an actor who can't remember the script." His words trembled, not with fear, but with exhaustion. Every morning he wore a new expression, a curated tone of voice, a persona tailored to the expectations of each person he met. "I'm a husband in one house, a son in another, a friend in the bar, a stranger to myself." His dreams were filled with mirrors that refused to reflect him. When he woke, he would touch his face in the dark, as if trying to confirm he still existed beneath the performance. Jung wrote that the mask, once overfed, devours the soul that created it. Modern science now echoes this warning. Neuroscientists studying identity fragmentation discovered that prolonged social performance, the constant adaptation to others' expectations, triggers the same neural patterns as trauma. The brain begins to treat self-expression as a threat. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for authenticity and moral reasoning, goes silent. Meanwhile, the amygdala, the brain's alarm, lights up each time the real self tries to speak. In other words, the body believes that being yourself could get you killed. This is not new. The ancients knew of this silent death. In the Eleusinian mysteries of Greece, initiates wore masks to embody gods, but they were warned, do not forget who you are behind the god you portray. In Buddhist teachings, the concept of Maya, illusion, warns that the self we project to the world is merely a veil. And in the Christian tradition, Christ condemned the hypocrites, a word that literally means actors. Every culture has whispered the same warning. Beware the role that becomes your reality. Imagine a woman at a dinner party. Her laughter fills the room, but it's hollow, perfectly timed, a learned rhythm. Beneath the table, her fingers twitch, restless, unseen. She remembers a time she used to cry easily. Now she cannot even feel sadness without rehearsing it first. That is how the mask wins. Not through violence, but through imitation. It copies your gestures, your smile, your pain, until even your suffering feels artificial. The more you wear it, the more it wears you back. The first sign is numbness. You stop reacting to beauty. Music loses its color, sunlight feels intrusive, then comes distortion. Your reflection no longer aligns with your memory. You begin to distrust your own emotions, asking, is this me, or just the version of me others need? Eventually, you disappear in plain sight. People still talk to you, but only to your mask. And the real you, the one who once dreamed, doubted, felt alive, becomes a ghost haunting your own life. This, Jung believed, was the modern plague. Not war, not poverty, but psychic amnesia. The forgetting of the soul. We have replaced the search for meaning with the performance of meaning. We no longer ask, who am I? We ask, who should I be to survive today? Our technology rewards it. Our society celebrates it. The algorithm prefers masks that smile. The camera prefers faces that don't tremble. And so we erase ourselves, one post, one pose, one false smile at a time. But the persona is not evil. It was born out of necessity. The mask allows us to function, to communicate, to belong. It becomes dangerous only when we begin to worship it, when the tool becomes the idol. In the silence of night, when the applause fades, that is when the mask starts whispering. It tells you that without it, you are nothing, that no one would love the face beneath, that your true voice is too strange, too broken, too real. That is the lie that keeps humanity enslaved. If you listen closely, beneath the noise of your daily performance, you will hear a faint sound. It is the cracking of porcelain. The mask has begun to fracture. The persona cannot bear the weight of your hidden truth forever. And when it breaks, as it always does, what remains is the raw, unfiltered self, trembling in the light of awareness. Some call this madness, but Jung called it individuation. The question is no longer whether you wear a mask. The question is, when the mask finally shatters, will there still be someone behind it to recognize the face in the mirror? It begins long before we know the word mask. Before we learn language, we learn the look in our parents' eyes, that silent measure of acceptance or rejection. A baby does not yet understand morality or culture, but it understands approval. Each smile from the mother is a signal. This version of you is safe. Each frown, this version must die. And so, the child begins its first act of survival, trimming its own soul to fit inside the narrow frame of love. That is the origin of the persona. Not vanity, not deceit, fear. The fear of abandonment. The infant cries too loudly, the father turns away. The child speaks too honestly, the teacher punishes. The adolescent confesses too much, and their peers laugh. One wound at a time, the authentic self learns a lesson. Truth is dangerous. And so, piece by piece, it hides behind what Jung called the social face, a face sculpted from other people's expectations. Jung once described meeting a patient who spoke with the calm eloquence of a philosopher, his gestures perfectly rehearsed. But every word felt hollow, as though recited from memory. Beneath the surface, there was a man drowning. "I have no center," he admitted, "only mirrors reflecting what others want to see." Jung wrote that this condition, a life lived entirely as persona, is the most polite form of insanity. You appear functional, even admirable, but inside the self is starving for oxygen. The brain, as modern neuroscience shows, is wired for adaptation. Mirror neurons fire when we observe others, teaching us how to belong, how to imitate emotion. But when imitation becomes our primary form of existence, those same neurons begin to blur the boundary between the real and the performed. MRI scans of chronic social performers, people who constantly suppress their feelings to maintain a certain image, reveal heightened activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, the region that registers conflict. Their brains live in a perpetual state of contradiction. The persona smiles while the self screams. Yet this performance is rewarded. Society applauds, conformity disguised as virtue. Schools teach obedience before curiosity. Workplaces value predictability over passion. Even friendships, in their fragile social choreography, demand the suppression of complexity. We have been conditioned to equate likability with survival, and so the mask becomes our passport to existence. In myth, this story repeats endlessly. The Greeks told of Proteus, the sea god who could change form at will to escape capture. Humanity has become Proteus, shifting shape to avoid rejection. But there's a cost. Every transformation leaves a scar. The Hindu philosophy of Lila, the cosmic play, reminds us that existence is a divine drama. But even the gods, when they forget they are playing, become trapped in their own illusion. Jung saw this reflected in modern man. Actors who have forgotten they are on stage, believing the costume is their skin. Let me take you to a scene. Zurich, 1923. A young woman named Elise sits across from Jung, her posture immaculate. She speaks in precise sentences, eyes steady, tone polite, but her hands tremble. She confesses she cannot sleep unless she rehearses her day out loud, replaying every interaction, correcting every possible mistake. "I must sound right," she says. "I must appear composed." Beneath her control lies terror, the terror of being seen unprepared. Jung writes that when he asked her to speak freely, she froze. Silence filled the room, thick and unbearable. "I don't know who I am without the right words," she whispered. In that moment, Jung saw it clearly. The persona had devoured the person. Elise had become an echo, a perfect reflection of societal virtue, emptied of her own voice. Her dreams, filled with mannequins and theater masks, were her psyche's rebellion. The unconscious, Jung said, will always seek balance. When the conscious mind hides behind perfection, the shadow, that exiled part of the soul, grows monstrous in the dark. Today, we see Elise multiplied across millions of screens. Every filtered selfie, every performance of happiness, every curated opinion is a brick in the cathedral of the persona. Technology has industrialized the mask. We no longer need to pretend face to face. The machine does it for us. We construct avatars of desire, posting them into the void, waiting for validation to confirm our existence. We have mistaken visibility for being. But beneath this global masquerade, the same ancient wound remains, the fear of non-acceptance. Our collective persona, polished, algorithmic, endlessly smiling, is a monument to insecurity. The tragedy is that the more perfectly we perform, the lonelier we become. For connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is the one thing the persona cannot allow. It fears exposure more than death. In the myth of Narcissus, the youth falls in love with his reflection, unable to separate himself from the image. He dies staring into the illusion. Jung warned that the modern world was approaching this same fate, a civilization drowning in its own reflection. The persona, once a tool for communication, has become a parasite feeding on attention. It thrives on applause and withers in silence. And so we raise children to wear masks before they can speak. We call it manners, professionalism, branding. But what it really is training in self-erasure. The mask is not born at adulthood. It begins in the nursery, polished in school, perfected in the workplace, canonized in the digital realm. By the time we reach maturity, we no longer remember the raw face beneath. Yet Jung believed there is still hope. The psyche, though buried, remembers its shape. Somewhere beneath the layers of persona, there is a voice that still trembles with truth. It hides behind anxiety, behind exhaustion, behind the quiet sense that something essential has been lost. That discomfort, that ache, is not a symptom of failure. It is the soul knocking on the walls of its own prison. The birth of the persona was not a sin, it was a wound. But like every wound, it demands to be seen before it can heal. To face it is to risk rejection, yes, but to refuse is to vanish entirely. The mask may help you survive, but only the unmasked can truly live. And somewhere deep in your mind, you already know this. That is why you feel the tremor when someone looks at you too long, when silence stretches too wide, when you sense that your face has become too perfect. It is the self calling from beneath the costume, whispering the forbidden truth. The mask was never meant to win. There comes a night when the mask no longer fits. It starts with something small, a forgotten smile, a word spoken too honestly, a silence that lasts a second too long. Then the fracture widens. The carefully crafted face you've worn for years begins to tremble like porcelain under heat. It's not the world that changes. It's you. The performance becomes unbearable, and behind the persona, something ancient begins to stir, something you've spent a lifetime avoiding. Jung called it the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is everything you were forced to bury to remain loved. Your rage, your envy, your desires, your shame, all exiled into darkness. While the persona wins applause, the shadow watches silently, storing every unspoken truth. It grows in silence, waiting for the moment the mask weakens. When it does, it doesn't whisper. It roars. The polite man erupts in sudden violence. The devoted mother walks out in the night without reason. The spiritual teacher succumbs to temptation. It shocks the world, but the psyche has simply balanced its books. In one of Jung's most unsettling cases, a respected pastor confessed that during his sermons a second voice spoke in his mind, mocking the words he preached. "When I speak of purity, it laughs," he said. "When I pray, it whispers obscenities." Jung told him the voice was not demonic, but human, his own denied self reclaiming speech. The pastor wept. He realized he had preached light for decades, while his darkness had become eloquent in silence. The shadow, Jung wrote, will always find a way to be heard. Neuroscience now confirms what Jung intuited. Suppressed emotions do not vanish, they reroute. Brain imaging of chronic emotional repression shows hyperactivation of the amygdala and hippocampus, regions tied to memory and fear. The energy doesn't die, it hides. This repressed charge, if unintegrated, manifests as compulsions, addictions, outbursts, and depression. The shadow is not superstition. It is unprocessed consciousness. And like all energy, it demands transformation. When the persona cracks, reality itself seems to warp. The man who always smiled begins to feel paranoia. The woman who always soothed others begins to hate their need. These are not failures of character. They are symptoms of awakening. The psyche, tired of disguise, begins to push back. Jung described this process as enantiodromia, the reversal of all things. What has been lived in one extreme swings violently to the other. The saint becomes the sinner. The pleaser becomes the destroyer. The light gives birth to its opposite. In myth, this is the descent to the underworld. Inanna descending naked through the seven gates. Orpheus crossing into shadow to retrieve what he loves. Christ descending into hell before resurrection. Every tradition tells the same story. Illumination requires confrontation. You cannot rise until you've met what you buried. The shadow is not the enemy of light. It is its foundation. The brighter the persona, the darker the unseen counterpart. Imagine a man named David, a corporate leader, disciplined, admired. He believes himself rational, fair, above emotion. But each night he dreams of a black wolf following him through corridors. One morning, after an argument at work, he finds himself shouting at his reflection. He throws a glass. The mask shatters, literally and psychologically. In therapy, he confesses a secret rage toward those who depend on him. Beneath his persona of control lived a child who once felt powerless. The wolf was his repressed strength, twisted into aggression by years of denial. Once he faced it, truly looked into its eyes, the dream stopped. The shadow, acknowledged, loses its hunger. This confrontation is not comfortable. Jung warned that meeting the shadow is like looking into the eyes of your own worst enemy and realizing it has your face. Most people turn away. They prefer the illusion of peace to the truth of fragmentation. But those who persist find something extraordinary, that beneath the monstrous forms of the shadow lies vitality, creativity, and freedom. The energy once used to suppress truth becomes fuel for transformation. Modern psychology names this integration. Studies on emotional regulation and trauma healing show that awareness and acceptance of repressed material activate the brain's prefrontal cortex. restoring coherence to the nervous system. In other words, the very act of acknowledging the darkness rewires the mind toward wholeness. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." But society fears such integration. It thrives on division between good and evil, success and failure, saint and sinner. The persona keeps these categories intact. The shadow dissolves them. When a person integrates their darkness, they become unpredictable, untamed by shame, ungoverned by fear, and no system built on conformity can tolerate that. So the world calls them mad, dangerous, or immoral. Yet they are simply free. Look closely at history's prophets, artists, and revolutionaries. Every one of them walked through their shadow. Nietzsche, Van Gogh, Dostoevsky, each shattered the mask and paid the price. Their insights came not from comfort, but from dissent. Jung believed that humanity's survival depends on this same dissent, not as individuals alone, but as a species. "The world will ask you who you are," he wrote, "and if you do not know, it will tell you." The shadow is the only path to knowing, but there is danger here too. The shadow, once released, can possess. If faced without humility, it consumes the ego rather than transforms it. This is how tyrants are born, men who mistake their darkness for power instead of wisdom. They do not integrate, they identify. The mask falls and the monster takes the throne. Jung saw this collective possession unfold in the rise of totalitarian movements, where entire nations projected their shadow onto the enemy. What they refused to face within themselves, they tried to destroy in others. When the persona cracks, you stand at the threshold between awakening and madness. The difference lies in whether you confront the shadow consciously or flee from it in terror. Integration requires courage, the courage to hold your own contradictions without collapsing, to see both saint and sinner within and say, "I am both, and I am more." The mask protects you from pain, but it also protects you from truth. When it breaks, the shadow steps forward not to punish, but to restore balance, to remind you that light without darkness is blindness. And so, the next time your reflection startles you, the next time you say something you didn't mean, or feel something you thought you'd buried, don't run. It's not the end of you. It's the beginning. Because when the persona cracks, the real face begins to breathe. And for the first time, the mask no longer wins. You believe you are in control of the mask. You think you choose what to reveal and what to hide. But your brain has been rewriting the script long before you were aware of it. Every glance of approval, every rejection, every moment of social tension becomes a line etched into your neural circuitry. You are not the actor anymore. You are the stage on which the play performs itself. Let us begin with the body, the instrument of the mask. When you walk into a room, your amygdala, that small almond-shaped organ of survival, scans for threat. But in the modern world, the threat is not a predator. It's judgment, rejection, disapproval. The same circuitry that once saved your ancestors from tigers now fires when someone raises an eyebrow at you. To protect you, the brain activates your social defense, the persona. You smile, adjust your tone, and betray yourself, all within milliseconds. This is not conscious. It is evolutionary. Neuroscientists have mapped this process. The amygdala signals the hypothalamus, releasing cortisol, the hormone of performance. Your prefrontal cortex, the seat of logic and authenticity, dims like a dying candle. Meanwhile, the insula, the part of your brain that senses emotion, begins to distort perception. You stop feeling truth and start simulating it. The persona takes command. You become fluent in inauthenticity, speaking a language the soul no longer understands. In Jung's time, this would have been called possession, a temporary takeover by an archetypal force. Today, we call it social conditioning. Different words, same prison. The modern mind, trained to perform since childhood, builds pathways of reflexive compliance. Studies from Stanford and Yale show that individuals under chronic social evaluation lose access to self-referential awareness, the neural signature of the authentic I. Their identity becomes an algorithm of reaction. Picture this. A woman stands before a mirror rehearsing her smile before a meeting. She thinks she's preparing, but her brain is entering what cognitive scientists call predictive coding. It begins to simulate the expected responses of others, building an internal feedback loop. Soon, her mind is no longer responding to reality, only to its imagined version. The persona becomes predictive fiction, a living hallucination of acceptance. Jung foresaw this in mythic language. He warned that when the mask fuses with the mind, consciousness turns into theater. The ego becomes director, actor, and audience, all trapped in a self-made play. Neuroscience now describes this as the default mode network, the brain's autopilot of narrative self-construction. It's active when we're not doing anything externally but internally performing ourselves. It tells the story of me. The more we feed it with social validation, the louder it grows. Eventually, silence becomes unbearable because silence is the absence of script. Functional MRI studies on long-term meditators reveal something astonishing. When the persona quiets, the default mode network calms. The boundaries of self loosen. The subject reports a sense of no actor. For Jung, this was not annihilation, but integration. The ego ceasing its masquerade and allowing the self, the total psyche, to breathe. Neuroscience calls it self-transcendence. Ancient mystics called it awakening. The language differs, but the map is the same. Let's return to another of Jung's patients, a pianist who had lost the ability to play spontaneously. Every note was perfect, yet lifeless. He confessed, "When I touch the keys, I feel watched, even when alone." Jung recognized the symptom. The inner critic had become internalized society. The man's motor cortex could still play, but his limbic system, the emotional engine, had frozen. His brain was performing without presence. Only when he confronted the fear of imperfection, when he allowed mistakes, did his music return to life. The mask had paralyzed his neurons. Modern cognitive research supports this. Experiments at Harvard show that fear of negative evaluation reduces activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, impairing creative flow and emotional regulation. The very structure of the brain reshapes itself to maintain the persona. It sacrifices authenticity for safety. What Jung called the soul's suffocation, neuroscience calls neuroplastic adaptation. The most chilling discovery comes from studies on chronic social media users. The constant need for approval creates a dopamine feedback loop identical to addiction. The nucleus accumbens, the brain's reward center, lights up with every like. But with each cycle, the baseline drops. You need more validation to feel normal. The brain's sense of self-worth externalizes entirely. The mask becomes chemically reinforced. We are not only psychologically addicted to persona, we are biologically enslaved by it. This explains why even when the mask cracks, we cling to it. Removing it triggers withdrawal. The brain panics, mistaking authenticity for danger. The pulse quickens, cortisol surges. Old fears of rejection resurface. The body resists liberation. Jung understood this before the science existed. People will do anything, he wrote, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. He could have been describing the neurochemical tyranny of modern identity, yet inside this machinery of self-deception lies the seed of freedom. The same neuroplasticity that builds the mask can dismantle it. When we practice truth, speaking it, even trembling, we forge new neural connections. The prefrontal cortex lights up, reasserting executive control. The amygdala learns that vulnerability is not death. Over time, authenticity becomes a new reflex. The mask loses its power. The actor remembers he was never the role. Ancient disciplines intuited this rewiring long ago. Buddhist meditation, Christian contemplation, and Stoic introspection all reduce activity in the same regions that sustain the illusion of persona. The mystic silence is the neuroscientist's cortical deactivation. Different paths, same threshold. The still point where the actor dissolves and the observer awakens. But be warned, the brain resists collapse of its narrative. It clings to familiarity even when it's killing you. That is why enlightenment feels like death. Because to the neural self, it is. The circuits that define me begin to fade, and for a moment you glimpse the abyss behind all roles. Jung called it the encounter with the self, the totality that precedes the mask. The mystics called it God. The neuroscientists call it integration. The language is irrelevant. The experience is the same, a return to original consciousness. When the persona becomes the actor, the soul sleeps. But when awareness returns, the performance ends. And in that silence, when no script remains, you remember the truth that science and spirit whisper together. Consciousness was never the mask, it was the witness behind it, and the witness at last is awake. Long before Jung gave the mask a name, the ancients were already afraid of it. They saw how easily the soul could become trapped in its own performance. They carved their warnings into stone, painted them on temple walls, hid them in stories that children would one day mistake for myths. Every civilization knew that the mask was not just a symbol. It was a spell, a form of possession disguised as protection. In ancient Egypt, the priests of Ra wore gilded masks during ceremonies, not as decoration, but as invocation. They believed that by wearing the face of the god, the mortal became a vessel for divine energy. But there was a law. When the ritual ended, the mask had to be removed immediately. To keep it on was blasphemy, a theft of divinity. Those who forgot were said to lose their minds, wandering through the desert speaking in the god's voice, unable to remember their own. Jung would later see this as the first warning of psychic inflation, when the persona of power consumes the person beneath. In the temples of Greece, actors of Dionysus wore masks to dissolve their individuality. They believed that the god of ecstasy spoke through them, but Dionysus was not a safe god. He demanded surrender. When the mask stayed too long, the actor no longer knew where the god ended, and he began. Madness followed. Divine intoxication, yes, but also fragmentation. The Greeks called this mania. Jung saw in it a psychological truth, that archetypes, once invoked, can overtake the ego if not balanced by consciousness. The mask of the god becomes the prison of the human. Even in early Christianity, the same symbol returns. The word hypocrite, so often used by Christ, did not mean liar. It meant actor. In the ancient theaters of Athens, the hypocrites wore masks to project emotion. Christ's rebuke was not moral, but existential. Woe to you, actors who wash the outside of the cup while the inside is filthy. The divine warning was clear. Salvation is not found in performance. To pretend holiness is to lose the soul entirely. In India, the Upanishads whisper another truth. The word person itself comes from persona, that through which sound passes. The human being is an echo chamber for cosmic voices. The danger, as the sages warned, is when the echo believes it is the origin. Maya, the illusion of the world, is not merely external, it is psychological. The false self that confuses appearance with being. Every spiritual tradition carries its own version of this story. In Zen Buddhism, the monk who claims enlightenment is sent back to wash dishes until he forgets the claim. In Sufism, the disciple must dance until the dancer disappears. In Taoism, Lao Tzu speaks of the uncarved block, the state before identity takes shape. All these metaphors converge on the same abyss, the moment when the mask falls and the face beneath meets the infinite. Jung recognized in these myths the timeless structure of the psyche. He saw the gods not as external beings, but as living symbols within the human mind. The persona of the priest, the actor, the saint, each represents a layer of adaptation. But the soul beneath, the self, cannot be contained forever. When the mask of the god clings too tightly, he wrote, the human must either awaken or perish. The ancients turned this into ritual. Jung turned it into therapy. Both sought the same outcome, remembrance. Consider the ancient initiations of Eleusis. The initiate entered darkness, blindfolded, stripped of name and status. For 3 days, they wandered through tunnels, hearing only whispers. When they emerged, they were given a mirror. The ritual's purpose was not to show them a reflection, but to remind them that all forms, even the divine, are masks. What you worship is a projection of what you've buried. The gods are mirrors for forgotten selves. Modern psychology has rediscovered this truth under a different name, projection. What we adore or despise in others is what we cannot yet accept within ourselves. Religion, myth, even politics become grand theaters of the persona. Nations wear masks of virtue to hide collective shadows. Movements claim moral purity while drowning in repression. Humanity reenacts the same ancient tragedy, the refusal to recognize the mask as one's own creation. The ancients feared this moment of forgetting. In Tibet, monks meditate on the Bardo Thodol, the Book of the Dead, which warns that when the soul leaves the body, it will encounter terrifying gods. But these deities, the text insists, are not real beings. They are projections of one's own mind. Salvation lies in recognition. Do not fear the masks, they are yours. Jung saw this as the ultimate psychological truth, that liberation comes not from escape, but from awareness. Science, in its modern language, has begun to echo this ancient wisdom. Cognitive anthropologists studying ritual possession found that participants who consciously enter and exit altered identities show greater psychological integration than those who suppress them. The brain, it seems, was designed for symbolic play, but only when the player remembers it is play. The ancients built rituals to remind themselves of this boundary. We have removed the rituals, but kept the masks, and so we forget. Imagine a civilization that never ends its ceremony. A culture where the priest remains in costume, the actor never leaves the stage, the believer never questions the idol. That is the world we live in now. The mask has become permanent, its removal considered madness. The ancients would have called it possession. Jung called it neurosis. The difference is only in vocabulary, but the warnings still stand. From the pyramids to the parables, from the Vedas to the Gospels, humanity's oldest voices whisper the same message. To forget the face beneath the mask is to die before dying. The one who mistakes performance for essence becomes a ghost in their own existence. And ghosts, Jung would say, are not souls of the dead. They are fragments of the living who refuse to awaken. You may believe these stories are ancient, irrelevant, poetic, but they were written for you. They were warnings carved into eternity, so that one day, when you felt the suffocation of your own performance, you would recognize the pattern. The gods are not gone. They're alive inside your psychology, waiting for you to remove the mask and face them. Because the ancient secret is this: the divine was never something you wore. It was the face you hid beneath. The mask never announces its arrival. It moves quietly, like fog creeping across a sleeping city. One morning you wake, and your reflection no longer startles you, not because it's familiar, but because it's empty. That is how possession begins, not with chaos, but with calm, the calm of surrender. You no longer fight to be real, you simply perform, and the applause becomes your heartbeat. Jung wrote that the greatest danger of the persona is not deception, but identification. When you forget that the mask is a mask, you cease to exist as an individual soul. You become an instrument of expectation, a hollow echo of the world's demands. But how do you know when the transformation is complete? The signs are subtle, insidious, and always disguised as normality. The first sign is emotional anesthesia. You no longer feel deeply. Not joy, not grief, not awe. Your emotional spectrum narrows to a safe middle ground where nothing hurts and nothing heals. The brain, exhausted from constant performance, numbs itself. Dopamine levels flatten. Cortisol lingers. You begin to interpret tranquility as emptiness, silence as failure. This is not peace, it is paralysis. The second sign is over-adaptation. You read rooms faster than you read yourself. You adjust tone, posture, and vocabulary instinctively, becoming whatever the environment demands. Neuroscientists call this hypervigilance, a remnant of trauma encoded in the nervous system. You have become a shapeshifter, fluent in every dialect of belonging except your own. Jung compared such individuals to chameleons who forget their original color. Then comes performance fatigue, a hollow exhaustion that no rest can cure. Sleep restores the body but not the self. You dream of being chased, of losing your voice, of walking through mirrors that refuse to reflect you. These are not random images. The unconscious, Jung said, speaks in symbols when the conscious mind refuses truth. The dreams are your psyche's SOS, the scream of a soul drowning beneath its own smile. Another sign, the fear of silence. You fill every moment with noise, music, conversation, screens, because silence is the only place the mask cannot exist. It dissolves without an audience. In solitude, the cracks widen. You begin to sense something moving beneath the performance, something raw and unfiltered. Most people run from this encounter. They mistake it for loneliness, but it is the opposite. It is the self returning. The fifth sign is moral mimicry. You adopt opinions not because you believe them, but because they sound virtuous. You defend causes, post affirmations, repeat slogans, all to maintain your moral persona. The digital age has perfected this theater. Virtue signaling, social outrage, curated empathy, each a mask that hides the absence of genuine conviction. Jung warned that the moral persona often conceals the darkest shadow. The louder one proclaims purity, the deeper the corruption hiding beneath. There are physical signs too. The mask imprints itself into flesh, the forced smile that never reaches the eyes, the stiff jaw from repressed anger, the shallow breathing of perpetual self-control. The body becomes an accomplice in the deception. In time, it forgets how to relax, because relaxation would let the truth escape. The most terrifying sign, however, is disconnection from desire. You no longer know what you truly want. Every goal feels inherited, every ambition rehearsed. You chase success not because it fulfills you, but because it validates the mask. Jung called this the quiet tragedy of normal people, those who achieve everything except themselves. In modern psychology, these signs mirror the symptoms of dissociation. The mind splits between the presented self and the hidden self, each unaware of the other. Functional MRI scans of individuals with chronic self-suppression show fragmented neural connectivity between emotional and cognitive centers. The self literally splits at the biological level. You are no longer one consciousness. You are two pretending to be one. And yet, the world rewards this sickness. Corporations call it professionalism. Relationships call it compromise. Religion calls it obedience. Society praises the well-adjusted mask because it keeps the machinery running. The cost is only your soul. But there are smaller, quieter indicators too. Moments when the truth leaks through. A sudden tear during a song you don't understand. An inexplicable anger at a stranger's honesty. A longing for something you cannot name. These are fractures in the facade, small ruptures through which the forgotten self breathes. Jung advised not to seal these cracks, but to widen them. In The Fissures, he wrote, "The light enters. A man who has lost himself will not always appear broken. He may seem calm, efficient, admired, but if you listen closely, his laughter is one beat too late. His silence 1 second too long. The unconscious trembles behind the curtain, and when the show ends, when the audience disperses and the applause fades, that's when the terror begins. The mask demands to be worn even in solitude. Without it, you don't know who to be. Imagine standing before a mirror after decades of performance. You stare into your own eyes and feel nothing. No recognition, just the eerie sense that the reflection is studying you back. That is the moment Jung called the return of the repressed. The self, exiled for years, begins to reappear. First as unease, then as chaos, then as awakening. The mask resists, tightening like skin, whispering, "Don't look too closely, there's nothing there." But you already know that's a lie. Every great awakening begins with disillusionment. You must first see that the life you built is not truly yours, that your words have been borrowed, your beliefs rehearsed, your identity stitched together from expectations. This realization feels like death, because to the persona, it is. But beyond that death lies rebirth. So if you find yourself weary for no reason, suspicious of your own smile, or haunted by the quiet sense that something essential has gone missing, do not panic. These are not symptoms of failure. They are the first whispers of truth. The mask is slipping and the soul is breathing again. Listen carefully. Beneath the fatigue, the noise, the numbness, there's a heartbeat that does not perform. That sound is not applause. It's the sound of being alive. And once you hear it, the mask can never fit the same way again. The fall of the mask is not a single event. It is a descent, a slow psychological unraveling that feels at once like dying and being born. Jung warned that individuation, the process of becoming whole, begins not with light but with darkness. The persona must collapse because truth cannot live in disguise. What follows is not pretty, not poetic. It is a demolition of identity. The first stage is dissonance, the uneasy awareness that something feels off. You wake each morning to a faint disquiet, a restlessness that no success can silence. The compliments ring hollow, the achievements taste like ash. This is the whisper before the storm. You are not who you pretend to be. The psyche, tired of its own theater, begins to rebel. Small cracks appear. An unexpected anger, a sudden tear, a forgotten joy. You call it burnout. The soul calls it exposure. In this stage, dreams become vivid. You may see yourself lost in endless corridors, searching for a room without doors. You may hear a voice that calls your name from behind mirrors. These are not nightmares, they are messages. The unconscious is staging its intervention. Modern psychology calls it cognitive dissonance. Jung called it the first stirring of the self. Then comes disintegration. The mask begins to fracture. What once felt natural now feels impossible. You forget your lines in the play of life. The persona resists. It tightens its grip. You double down on old habits, overcompensate with positivity, drown yourself in distractions. But suppression no longer works. The emotions you buried return amplified. Rage, grief, fear. They pour through the cracks like floodwater. You begin to feel possessed by moods that don't fit your image. The truth is emerging, and it will not be contained. This stage terrifies most people. It feels like madness. Jung compared it to the myth of descent. Inanna stripped of her garments as she enters the underworld. Each garment is a mask, each mask a lie. The more she loses, the closer she comes to her essence. Neuroscientists studying ego, dissolution, and trauma therapy describe the same pattern. As identity structures collapse, the brain's sense of narrative coherence falters. It feels like dying because, in a sense, it is the death of the false self. Next comes confrontation, the meeting with the shadow. This is the night's sea journey, the confrontation with all that was repressed. The polite face encounters the beast beneath. Jung called this moment the nigredo, the black phase of alchemy when the old form decomposes. Depression, confusion, even despair arise. The persona screams for rescue, but no savior comes. The only way out is through. In this stage, projection intensifies. You begin to see your shadow everywhere. In lovers and friends and enemies, the world becomes a mirror of your denied self. Jung said that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our lives and we will call it fate. Every argument, every betrayal, every failure becomes a clue pointing inward. The descent demands ruthless honesty. There is no redemption without recognition. After confrontation comes surrender. This is the most paradoxical stage. When the mask finally shatters, there is nothing left to defend. The ego collapses under the weight of truth. You feel naked, unanchored, stripped of identity. Many mistake this for nihilism, but it is liberation in disguise. The silence that follows is not emptiness, it is spaciousness. Jung described it as the threshold of the self, where the fragments begin to rearrange themselves into something whole. In this surrender, ancient wisdom and modern science converge. Neurologically, the brain enters what researchers call theta synchrony, a state of coherence between emotion and cognition, chaos and order. Spiritually, it is the dark night of the soul, when the divine and the human become indistinguishable. The old persona dies, but awareness remains. You are no longer the actor, you are the observer watching the play dissolve. And then, quietly, comes integration. From the rubble of the mask, a new authenticity begins to form, not built, but remembered. You rediscover the forgotten instincts, the lost desires, the innocence buried under years of performance. The shadow, once feared, becomes an ally. It lends you depth, power, compassion. Jung said, "The gold is in the dark. What was once repressed returns transformed. Energy reclaimed from exile." At this stage, life itself changes texture. Colors feel sharper, silence becomes music, time slows. The world looks the same but moves differently. Neuroscientists observing this transformation note shifts in the brain's salience network, the system that determines what matters. After integration, the trivial loses power. Authenticity reorganizes perception. The result is not bliss, but clarity. Yet the descent has one more stage, return. Like every mythic journey, you must bring what you found back to the surface. Many refuse. They remain in solitude, unwilling to re-enter the masquerade of society. But Jung insisted that individuation is incomplete without return. The awakened must live among the asleep without falling back into their dreams. To wear the mask again, this time consciously, as a tool, not a master. This final stage tests the strength of your awareness. The world will tempt you to perform again, to forget, But something irreversible has occurred. The eyes behind the mask have changed. You see the machinery of illusion clearly now. You can smile without deception, speak without pretense, act without losing yourself. This is not perfection, it is presence. In myth, this moment is symbolized by the phoenix rising from its own ashes, feathers still smoldering. It has died and remembered its immortality. The collapse of the mask is not the end of identity. It is its renewal. The persona, once tyrant, becomes servant again. You can now wear it lightly, knowing it is only a garment. And when you finally stand in the quiet aftermath of the descent, breathing for the first time without performance, you understand what Jung meant when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." You realize fate was never written in the stars. It was written in the mask, and by watching it burn, you reclaim the pen. The individual mask is dangerous, but the collective mask, that is apocalyptic. When a whole society agrees to wear the same face, the illusion becomes law. Jung warned that when the persona expands beyond the individual, it crystallizes into culture, ideology, and nation. Humanity begins to dream together, but the dream is false. It calls itself civilization. Beneath it, the collective shadow waits. Patient, hungry, disguised as progress. It begins with a shared fear, chaos. The human mind, terrified of its own darkness, projects order outward. Governments, religions, corporations, each becomes a mirror of the psyche's desire for control. The persona of society is born, respectable, moral, rational. It speaks in the language of virtue. It claims to protect us from barbarism, but it is built on repression. Every empire begins with a promise to bring light, and every empire hides a dungeon where the light cannot reach. Jung saw this with prophetic clarity during the rise of totalitarian regimes in Europe. He called them psychic epidemics. They were not political accidents, but manifestations of the collective unconscious. The mask of order possessed millions simultaneously. Citizens stopped thinking individually and began to act as a single organism, a possessed one. This, Jung said, was the true horror of mass psychology, the replacement of the individual soul with the group persona. When that happens, conscience disappears. Modern neuroscience calls this phenomenon social contagion. Studies show that emotion, belief, and even perception synchronize within crowds. Mirror neurons fire not only for action, but for ideology. When the collective mask forms, dissent becomes a biological threat. To question the illusion is to risk exile from the hive. The brain interprets ostracism as death, and so most choose the comfort of conformity. The persona survives, the truth starves. Consider social media, the modern cathedral of the collective persona. It promises connection, but enforces uniformity. Algorithms reward outrage and imitation, not authenticity. The crowd becomes self-policing. The heretic, the one who speaks too honestly, is burned not by fire, but by silence. Jung once said that modern man has replaced the stake with invisibility. We exile rather than execute. The result is the same. The psyche learns that truth is fatal. The collective mask also feeds on identity. It divides the world into roles. The good citizen, the victim, the savior, the enlightened, the oppressed. Each role is a mask the group demands you wear. Step outside the script, and you become an anomaly, a virus in the system. History is filled with those who refused. Socrates, Galileo, Jesus, Jung himself. They are punished not for lies, but for truth, too disruptive to the collective dream. But the collective persona does more than silence. It seduces. It offers belonging, purpose, and moral certainty. In exchange, it asks only one thing: obedience. And obedience feels holy when everyone agrees. Crowds chanting in unison, flags waving, screens glowing. These are not political acts, but rituals of psychological fusion. The individual dissolves into the comfort of the collective. The voice of conscience fades into the roar of approval. Jung compared it to ancient possession, the god of the crowd devouring the souls of its worshippers. This is how societies lose their minds. When the collective mask becomes sacred, the shadow becomes unspeakable. The culture that preaches tolerance hides rage. The movement that demands justice conceals vengeance. The nation that glorifies freedom secretly craves control. Jung saw this duality as inevitable. Every light casts a shadow. The stronger the persona, the deeper the repression. In the 20th century, he watched this play out with terrifying precision. Nazi Germany, Soviet Russia, Imperial Japan, each claimed moral superiority, each justified horror in the name of order. Jung refused to see them as political anomalies. They were psychological inevitabilities. When a people suppress their darkness long enough, it erupts as collective possession. The individual shadow merges into the mass, and the result is hell with banners. But this is not ancient history. Today, the collective persona wears different masks. Technological, moral, spiritual. We speak of progress, yet our machines monitor every word. We celebrate self-expression, yet we censor discomfort. We preach empathy, yet our empathy ends at the border of the approved narrative. Civilization is now a theater of virtue, with entire populations reciting lines written by unseen directors. Jung's words echo louder than ever. The larger the crowd, the smaller the soul. Science, again, confirms the danger. Functional MRI studies of group decision-making show a decrease in prefrontal activity, the part of the brain responsible for moral reasoning. In crowds, individual judgment literally shuts down. The brain surrenders to the group's emotional frequency. This is why good people commit atrocities together. They are no longer themselves. They have become neurons in a larger unconscious organism. And yet, there is a perverse comfort in the collective mask. It offers escape from responsibility. The individual no longer bears the burden of choice. We replaces I. They replaces me. In that surrender, guilt evaporates. Jung said that this is why evil always presents itself as virtue. The mask of righteousness hides the machinery of denial. When everyone agrees that the mask is real, the lie becomes truth. Religions, too, are not immune. The church that once preached humility now markets salvation. The guru who preaches ego death builds an empire around his own image. Spirituality becomes performance, another layer of the collective costume. Jung warned that when religion loses its connection to the unconscious, it becomes ideology. The divine becomes doctrine. The sacred becomes spectacle. So how does one awaken within a collective dream? Slowly, painfully, by risking solitude. Jung wrote that true individuation is a crime against the collective persona because it reclaims the soul from the group mind. The awakened one walks among the hypnotized, speaking a language few remember. They are misunderstood, ridiculed, feared, because they remind others of the truth they've buried. The moment one individual removes their mask, everyone else feels the weight of their own. But there is also hope. Every awakening begins with contagion of another kind, consciousness spreading instead of delusion. When one person dares to live without a mask, they destabilize the collective lie. Their authenticity radiates through the field. The mirror neurons that once enforced conformity now reflect truth. The crowd can awaken, just as it can fall asleep. The collective masquerade ends, not with revolution, but with remembrance. It begins when enough individuals choose awareness over approval, truth over safety, being over belonging. Jung believed that this was the only path forward for humanity. Not political reform, not technological progress, but psychological awakening. Until then, civilization will remain a theater where ghosts applaud their own performance. The curtain is rising again, the actors are ready, the audience is the same. But somewhere, in the darkness of the crowd, a few have stopped clapping. They are watching with different eyes, eyes that remember. And perhaps, for the first time in history, the mask of the collective is starting to tremble. You cannot destroy the mask, you can only disarm it. Jung knew this. He understood that the persona, though dangerous, is necessary. A vessel, not a tomb. The goal is not to kill the actor, but to remember you are not the role. In a world that worships performance, this act of remembrance becomes rebellion. Consciousness is the only weapon left. The protocol begins with awareness. Brutal, uncompromising awareness. The kind that burns. It starts when you stop justifying your exhaustion and call it what it is. Spiritual suffocation. You must observe the mask in real time. How it smiles when you're dying inside. How it apologizes for truths it hasn't even spoken. How it seeks approval like a starving child. Jung called this active imagination, letting the psyche reveal itself under the light of consciousness. To see the mask is to weaken it. To name the illusion is to rob it of power. But awareness alone is not enough. The second phase is containment. The shadow, once awakened, rushes to the surface with the violence of floodwater. If you are unprepared, it will drown you. You must learn to hold it. Not repress, not release, but contain. This is not moral restraint. It is sacred discipline. The alchemists called it the vessel. Jung called it the ego's crucible, the capacity to endure contradiction without collapse. When anger, lust, or despair surge, you do not act them out. You observe. You become the witness of your own chaos. Modern neuroscience now describes this as metacognition, the ability to stand apart from thought. Studies show that meditation strengthens the prefrontal cortex, allowing emotional storms to pass without triggering reactivity. The ancient mystics were right. Awareness changes the brain. Consciousness rewires the circuitry of fear. Every time you choose observation over reaction, a new neural path is forged, one that leads back to freedom. The third phase is boundary. You must learn to distinguish empathy from enmeshment, compassion from compliance. The persona thrives on blurred borders. It feeds on your need to please. The protocol demands what Jung called the withdrawal of projections. Stop assuming responsibility for the emotions of others. Their approval is not oxygen. It is poison disguised as love. Boundaries are the immune system of the psyche. Without them, you absorb the collective sickness. There is a word in ancient Greek, sophrosyn. It means self-possession, the harmony between passion and reason. This is the state the protocol aims for. Not repression, but rhythm. The shadow is still there, but it no longer commands. The persona still exists, but it no longer deceives. The self moves like a flame protected by glass, fierce, visible, untouchable. But to live this way, you must also practice strategic withdrawal. There are environments that feed the mask: toxic workplaces, hollow friendships, screens that demand your face before your soul. Jung advised retreat as a form of hygiene. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, he said, but by making the darkness conscious. Sometimes that means solitude, silence, even boredom. These are not absences, they are antidotes. When you withdraw from noise, the mask starves. In today's language, this is dopamine fasting, reclaiming the nervous system from constant stimulation. Neurochemically, it restores sensitivity to subtle experience, the very sensitivity the mask dulls. You begin to feel, again, slowly, painfully, the small sounds of reality return: the hum of air, the pulse in your fingers, the quiet between breaths. Awareness descends from theory into flesh. The fourth phase is integration. It requires humility, the hardest virtue for the persona. Integration means allowing contradiction to coexist. You can be kind and ruthless, spiritual and flawed, broken and complete. Jung said the sign of maturity is holding opposites without hypocrisy. The shadow becomes a companion, not a threat. Neuroscience echoes this in the concept of coherence, when previously fragmented brain networks synchronize. Integration is not perfection, it is unity under awareness. But beware the final trap: identifying with the awakened self. Even enlightenment can become a mask, and the ego will claim victory, turning awareness into superiority. The spiritual persona is the most seductive of all: serene, detached, admired. Jung saw this in his patients who replaced their old lies with new ones painted in sacred colors. He warned, beware of wisdom that flatters. True consciousness makes you quieter, not holier. So the protocol demands vigilance. Watch your motives as if they belong to a stranger. When you speak, listen for the performance hidden in your tone. When you act, ask who is acting, the self or the mask. This is not paranoia, it is precision. Over time, the awareness becomes instinctive. The mask still rises, but you recognize its footsteps. You nod, acknowledge, and step aside. The persona performs, the self observes. Harmony replaces possession. Ancient traditions built entire disciplines around this vigilance. The Stoics practiced daily reflection, evening dialogues with the soul. The Buddhists watched thoughts like passing clouds. The Christian mystics spoke of the prayer of the heart, where every impulse becomes confession. Jung saw these not as religions, but as technologies of consciousness, methods for surviving the tyranny of the mask. The final phase of the protocol is embodiment. Awareness must descend into action, or it remains fantasy. You walk differently, speak differently, look at others differently. Each gesture becomes deliberate, free of the compulsions that once ruled you. Neuroscientists describe this as neurointegration, consciousness transforming from abstract insight into lived behavior, spirit becoming flesh again. The world will test you. It will try to reattach the mask, seduce you with belonging, threaten you with loneliness. But once you have seen the machinery behind the illusion, you cannot unsee it. You will play your roles still: parent, lover, worker, friend, but lightly, as a dancer wears costume. You will smile without deceit, speak without rehearsal, love without control. And when the collective demands you kneel to its false gods, you will bow only to truth. That is the final defense: consciousness. Not intellect, not strength, not faith. Awareness so deep that illusion cannot breathe in its presence. Jung called it the center that holds. The mystics called it the still point. Neuroscience calls it integrated awareness. It is all the same. It is the unmasked self, silent, luminous, unbreakable. So when you feel the mask tightening again, when the world tempts you to perform, remember the protocol. See, contain, protect, integrate, embody. The mind will resist. The mask will whisper. But awareness will outlast them both, because consciousness is not the mask's enemy. It is its maker, and the maker always has the power to end the performance. There comes a moment in the descent where everything you thought you were is gone. The voices that once guided you fall silent. The roles that defined you dissolve. You stand naked in the space between worlds. Not quite dead, not yet reborn. Jung called this the encounter with the self, the ultimate paradox of existence. The mask is shattered, the shadow integrated, and what remains is something ancient, wordless, terrifyingly real. The mind resists this final revelation because it dismantles the illusion of separation. You are not the actor or the stage, not the face or the mirror. You are the awareness in which all of it appears. The persona and the shadow were never enemies. They were two halves of a single truth. Light cannot know itself without darkness, and consciousness cannot awaken without illusion. The mask, the enemy you feared, was also the teacher that led you here. Jung said, the self is both infinite and unknowable, yet it manifests in every human face. What he meant was that divinity is not above us, but within, veiled beneath personality, trauma, and story. The psychological journey is the oldest spiritual one. to peel away what is false until only essence remains. But essence has no name. It cannot be owned, categorized, or displayed. It is pure presence, the witness that existed before the first mask was ever carved. In this silence, the world changes, not because it becomes better or brighter, but because you finally see it without projection. You no longer need others to mirror your worth, nor situations to justify your fear. The noise of desire fades, replaced by a strange calm. Not happiness, but clarity. Jung wrote that true consciousness feels like standing in a storm without moving, letting wind and rain pass through you without resistance. This is not detachment, it is surrender to reality. Ancient mystics described this state in different tongues. The Taoists called it returning to the uncarved block. The Buddhists named it emptiness. And the early Christians spoke of kenosis, the self poured out until only light remains. Jung saw in all these languages the same process. The ego dissolving into the self. The mask finally removed, not by force, but by understanding. But let us be honest. Few reach this state without agony. The death of the persona feels like dying because it is a kind of death. The brain, stripped of narrative, enters a void it cannot interpret. Neuroscientists studying near-death experiences find the same neural patterns in deep meditation, the quieting of the default mode network, the dissolution of self-boundaries. To the ego, this silence is annihilation. To the soul, it is liberation. Imagine standing before a mirror after everything has fallen apart. The reflection stares back without judgment. You no longer ask, "Who am I?" because the question no longer makes sense. The face you see is not you. It is humanity itself, timeless, observing through your eyes. Jung called this the archetype of the self, the totality of all opposites, divine and human, personal and universal. You are not special, yet you are sacred. You are not eternal, yet something eternal breathes through you. This realization changes everything. The wars between persona and shadow, good and evil, self and other, all dissolve into one movement of consciousness exploring itself. What you once feared as darkness was simply the side of God you refused to acknowledge. The demons you fled were angels, wearing unrecognized faces. The suffering you cursed was the crucible that burned away illusion. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And now you understand why. You also understand that awakening does not remove you from the world. It roots you deeper within it. You still walk among masks, but you see through them. You play your roles, parent, lover, stranger, but no longer mistake them for identity. You can laugh without pretending, cry without shame, love without needing to possess. Your presence alone becomes a mirror in which others glimpse their own forgotten faces. This is how consciousness spreads, not by preaching, but by being. Philosophically, this is the collapse of duality, the moment where psychology touches metaphysics. The self that observes and the world observed are the same field of awareness. Neuroscience can trace its neural correlates. Theology can name it God, but neither can contain it. It is the living mystery that breathes through every heartbeat and every silence between them. Jung called it the numinous. It is not belief, it is recognition, and yet the journey never truly ends. The mask will return, subtler, softer, shaped by new experiences. It will whisper, "Wear me again, just for a while." And you will, because life demands adaptation. But this time, you wear it consciously. You become what Jung described as transparent to the self, a human through whom the divine can see. The persona no longer hides you, it expresses you. So you re-enter the world. You smile at strangers, knowing that each one is a fragment of the same dream. You watch the crowd and see not deception, but longing. Billions of souls searching for the courage to remove their masks. You do not judge them. You remember that you once feared the same thing. Compassion replaces superiority. Love replaces understanding. Silence replaces certainty. And somewhere in that silence, you realize the truth that ended Jung's life's work. Consciousness is not a human achievement. It is the universe remembering itself. You are that remembrance, a brief spark of awareness playing at being someone, somewhere, for a little while. So let the mask fall. Let it break. Let it return when needed, but never forget it is a tool, not your face. The face beneath, raw, luminous, imperfect, is not something to reveal to the world. It is something to recognize within. When the persona dies, life begins. And in that final unveiling, when all illusions fade, one truth remains. The most terrifying and the most beautiful. There was never a mask at all. There was only you, pretending to be asleep.